to tell you that there is simultaneous interpretation in English and French. And now it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Jutta Urpilainen, EU Commissioner for International Partnerships, for her opening remarks. Commissioner, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, dear friends. I am very honored to welcome you to today's event with our partners, the International Labour Organization and UNICEF. 2021 is the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. Unfortunately, the new ILO UNICEF estimates released 1 week ago show that we are still very far from our target. The numbers are actually alarming. For the first time in 20 years, we see an increase of child workers reaching 160 million children. The highest increase is in Africa, and this is unsustainable. The pandemic, unfortunately, has hit the most vulnerable the hardest, with children and young people at the forefront. So, of course, we need to turn the tide. I want us to commit to putting the SDGs back on track, including target 8.7 to end child labour by 2025, and to offer every child a real opportunity. On behalf of the European Union, I would like to make 3 points today. First, we are committed to step up the EU's fight against child labour by pledging a zero tolerance policy on child labour in new trade agreements. The recently adopted EU strategy on the rights of children and child is a milestone in implementing this commitment, especially for the Union's external action. I am proud to say that since 2008, the EU has supported 150 projects targeting child labour in 65 countries for more than 200 million euros. We have been collaborating hereby with the ILO and other partners. The EU and its member states, Team Europe, is the biggest donor to the ILO and UNICEF, with over 1 billion euros of average yearly contributions. The ILO UNICEF estimates tells us that 70% of child workers are in agriculture. So we need to transform agriculture systems. The Clear Cotton project we are implementing with ILO and FAO is improving families' livelihoods and making them less dependent on the unpaid labour of their children. The project has removed around 4,000 children from child labour in cotton fields in Burkina Faso and Mali, reintegrating them into special schools before joining formal education. So my second point is that the work of most children in the agricultural sector contribute to products exported to Europe due to complex global supply chain. And this is why the EU is working on a new legislation introducing mandatory due diligence for EU companies across all sectors to address issues such as child labour and to increase supply chain sustainability. We will provide additional support to partner countries and local companies to comply with responsible business conduct and to adopt sustainable production practices. This will improve livelihoods, working conditions, and respect for human rights, including those of children. We will do so at large scale in entire industries, such as the cocoa in several Western African countries. Child labour is both the cause and the consequence of poverty and inequalities. We must tackle child labour under all of its different dimensions, ensuring quality education, decent income, social protection, gender equality, and leveraging the potential of empowered youth. And dear friends, this brings me to my last point. One of the worrying findings of the report is that an additional 16 million girls and boys in sub-Saharan Africa are being denied access to school. And this is completely unacceptable. Education is a top priority for the European Union and also for me personally. Every child must have the opportunity to go to school, and I have committed to increase EU support to education to at least 10% of funding under my responsibility. Acts really follow words. Last week, we announced the Boost Our Contribution to the Global Partnership for Education with 700 million euros for the next 7 years. So we really want to provide access to education to every child in this world. Dear friends, I am confident that we can really turn challenges into opportunities and that today's discussions will do just that. But support to our partner countries can only be as successful as the country-level engagement. We are ready to increase our work to support local activities to tackle that problem. The EU will continue to explore also new areas and innovative approaches to eradicate child labour in cooperation with the Alliance 8.7. The 2022 Global Conference on Child Labour in South Africa will be, of course, instrumental. The EU is ready to commit the further work with all actors towards an ambitious outcome by 2025. Some weeks ago, I had a bilateral discussion with Malala Yousafzai, and as she very powerfully says, I raise my voice not so that I can shout, but so that those who are without a voice can also be heard. So now it's time to raise our voices and act for all children in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that very inspiring speech and also for your commitment to addressing the question of child labor. You've outlined a number of innovative ideas that you have, and I'm sure we'll be putting into place. Thank you also for your commitment to the important collaboration between the European Commission, the EU, the ILO and UNICEF to address the problem of child labor, which, as you said, Commissioner, is reaching alarming levels, and the pandemic has not helped. And of course, the EU strategy for the rights of the child will certainly contribute to reducing this phenomena of child labor. Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner, for your speech. So as I said earlier, friends, the ILO and UNICEF have just released new global estimates on child labor. And as Commissioner Urpilainen said, the results, the outcomes are really alarming and should cause us all a great deal of dismay and, I would say, anger. So this report is going to be now presented to us by Mr. Musa Umaru. He is ILO Deputy Director General for Field Operations and Partnerships. He'll be speaking French, and then Ms. Charlotte Petri-Gonitska, Assistant Secretary General and UNICEF Deputy Executive Director for Partnerships. So they have 10 minutes to present the report. Please, the floor is yours, the screen is yours.
Madame la commissaire européenne pour les partenariats internationaux, Madame la ministre de l'Emploi, du Travail et de la Prévoyance sociale de la République démocratique du Congo, Madame la ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Union européenne et de la coopération d'Espagne, chers collègues, Madame la directrice exécutive adjointe de l'UNICEF, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous dire combien je suis honoré d'être ici aujourd'hui à vos côtés dans ce dialogue de haut niveau visant à discuter des actions à mener pour lutter contre le travail des enfants. Si vous me le permettez, je souhaiterais partager avec vous 3 messages. Tout d'abord, laissez-moi vous faire part de la situation du travail des enfants dans le monde. La situation est préoccupante. Il y a aujourd'hui 160 millions d'enfants au travail, ce qui représente près d'1 enfant sur 10. Même si ce ratio est resté stable en termes absolus, cela signifie que 8,4 millions d'enfants de plus qu'il y a 4 ans. Cette situation, comme vous pouvez le constater, et vous allez convenir avec moi, elle est inacceptable. C'est d'autant plus que la tendance à la diminution que nous avons observée ces 20 dernières années est inversée. En outre, ces chiffres ne prennent pas en compte l'impact de la pandémie COVID-19 qui, nous le savons tous, aggravera davantage la situation. Mais autre fait marquant du rapport que nous avons conjointement publié il y a quelques jours avec l'UNICEF, autre fait marquant donc, il y a aujourd'hui près de 79 millions des enfants qui travaillent dans des situations dangereuses, c'est-à-dire qui effectuent des travaux dangereux, qui mettent en danger leur santé, leur sécurité et leur développement moral. Plus de 112 millions de ces enfants travaillent dans l'agriculture, soit 7 enfants sur 10, beaucoup dans des activités familiales. En termes géographiques, et j'en suis particulièrement affecté, c'est en Afrique que l'augmentation est la plus significative, avec 20 millions d'enfants au travail de plus qu'en 2016. Beaucoup d'entre eux ont entre 5 et 11 ans. Même si nous avons enregistré des progrès constants en Asie-Pacifique et en Amérique latine, vous conviendrez sans doute avec moi que nous ne pouvons pas accepter que les enfants africains soient laissés pour compte. Mesdames et messieurs, j'allais dire que nous sommes engagés à atteindre la cible 8.7 des objectifs de développement durable et éliminer le travail des enfants à l'horizon 2025. Pour ce faire, il est indispensable de passer de la volonté politique à l'action. Il faut agir maintenant avec vigueur et de manière concertée. Les solutions existent et c'est là mon second message. Nous avons, entre 2000 et 2016, enregistré des progrès notables avec 94 millions d'enfants de moins au travail. Nous avons aussi obtenu, fait unique et historique, la ratification universelle de la Convention 181 de l'OIT sur les pires formes de travail des enfants. Nous exhortons donc tous nos États membres, dont nos partenaires européens, à penser à la sortie de la crise en mettant l'humain au centre des politiques de reprise économique et sociale. Pour ce faire, nous préconisons un certain nombre de recommandations qui suivent. Tout d'abord, en mettant en place des programmes et des politiques qui permettent un travail décent et un revenu adéquat pour les familles. Deuxièmement, il est indispensable de promouvoir un socle minimum de protection sociale pour tous. Les effets dévastateurs de la pandémie de COVID-19 l'ont montré, cet outil, tellement cher au modèle européen, doit être au cœur de la reprise. Il convient ensuite de redoubler d'efforts pour garantir l'accès à une éducation de qualité gratuite pour chaque enfant. L'OIT se tient à vos côtés dans ce combat avec les travailleurs du secteur éducatif. Il faut aussi promouvoir la participation de tous les acteurs à l'adoption de politiques. Ici, le modèle tripartite promu par l'OIT part de la reconnaissance du rôle et du renforcement de la capacité des partenaires sociaux, ainsi que la reconnaissance du droit d'association et de négociation collective comme droits fondamentaux comme droits fondamentaux et socle indispensable aux autres droits. Je tiens à souligner le rôle clé que jouent les organisations syndicales pour améliorer les conditions de vie, y compris dans le milieu rural. Je voudrais également reconnaître les efforts importants du secteur privé et son rôle fondamental, actuel et futur, tant dans les pays que dans les chaînes de valeur. Mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi de terminer par un dernier message adressé à nos partenaires européens. Plus que jamais, la coopération internationale et le soutien aux pays les plus touchés sont primordiaux. En ce sens, je souhaiterais reconnaître les efforts de l'Union européenne et les États membres dans la lutte contre le travail des enfants, en particulier à travers le financement et la coopération technique apportée par la même Commission européenne, la France, l'Espagne, les Pays-Bas et l'Allemagne. La lutte contre le travail des enfants est au cœur du mandat de l'OIT depuis presque 30 ans à travers son programme IPEC+, actif dans plus de 60 pays à travers le monde. Nous avons ainsi pu retirer des millions d'enfants du travail des enfants. Mais nous devons redoubler nos efforts. Nous devons innover. Nous devons soutenir davantage l'engagement et le travail, en particulier des pays pionniers de l'Alliance 8.7. À ce titre, nous nous réjouissons de l'intérêt de la Commission européenne à collaborer avec l'Alliance 8.7, qui compte déjà plus de 240 organisations et 24 pays pionniers. Les travaux de la Conférence mondiale sur l'éducation du travail des enfants de 2022 en Afrique du Sud, dont parlait Madame la Commissaire, ces travaux marqueront un moment critique pour que la coopération internationale et les États membres de l'OIT accélèrent la mise en œuvre de politiques pour éliminer le travail des enfants. Nous savons que nous pouvons compter sur l'Union européenne et ses États membres. Le bien-être des enfants en dépend et nous sommes tous responsables. Je vous remercie pour votre indulgente attention.
Thank you very much. Let's turn now to Ms. Charlotte Petri-Gornitska. Screen is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Commissioner Urpilainen, dear Musa, dear colleagues. I'm also very pleased to participate in this high-level event, co-organized and of course coordinated as well by DG International Partnership, the ILO and UNICEF, and the importance of marking the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Colleagues, you have mentioned the alarming outcomes of the report. I could repeat some figures. I will repeat one because I sometimes think that figures are always overwhelming, but think about just this one. Over half of exploited children are between the age of 5 and 11 years old. 5 and 11 years old. We're not talking adolescence, we're talking childhood. Child labor is frequently associated with school dropout or poor learning outcomes. And as said, most child labor occur in agriculture, especially within families, and is frequently hazardous. And beyond these numbers, there are lives. There are real stories of children whose rights are violated and whose futures are jeopardized. And we will have the opportunity later today to listen to testimonies by children and young people. And we have heard, and let's repeat that as well, that we have fallen behind the target for 2025, and that the COVID-19 crisis threatens to further erode progress. We know we need to act now. We know we need to act together and strongly. Child labor is a violation of child rights itself, and also a consequence of other child rights and human rights violations, which must be understood in a larger socio-economic context. And as said earlier, it requires a complex, multi-sectorial response to address the root causes. And it is the responsibility of governments, companies, civil society, and international organizations to join forces and to give priority to a COVID recovery, a development agenda, and humanitarian responses that will protect children from child labor. We also need to work with communities themselves. We need to really include families and children themselves to find solutions. Let me take the opportunity to say that the European Union has been a very strong partner in our efforts to eliminate child labor. And UNICEF really welcomes the recent adoption of the EU strategy on child rights, which specifically mentions the commitment of the Commission to contribute to these efforts. Child labor was also mentioned in the EU on promotion of human rights and democracy in the world. And in a recent resolution on the impact of the pandemic on children adopted by the European Parliament. And I would like to thank Commissioner Urpilainen especially for EU prioritizing education in your 7-year budget. We call on the European Union to support the following recommendations. They are 7, maybe 1 per year. No, that's not how we can work. But listen, Musa talked about it. First recommendation, to adopt an integrated approach, coordinating all European policies and instruments, make them, package them, coordinate them so that we can invest and support governments and other actors in priority programs to prevent and address child labor. Second, expand income support measures for vulnerable families through child benefits and other social protection measures. Third, invest in free and quality public schooling to provide viable alternatives to child labor. Third, ensure every child's birth is registered so that children have a legal entity and therefore can enjoy their rights. Strengthen child protection systems to identify the most vulnerable children, provide them with psychosocial support, and refer to other services as needed. 6, promote decent work for adults. We heard Musa. We need to include fair wages to break the cycle of poverty. And 7, strengthen legal and regulatory frameworks to promote responsible business practice that address child rights holistically, including the root causes of child labor. And the EU planned mandatory human rights due diligence legislation mentioned by Commissioner Urpilainen can send this strong signal. And really, if it addresses the full spectrum of business impact on children, it can be very forceful. So colleagues, we are losing ground. We know that things have improved. We know that we are losing ground and we are falling behind. We know that COVID is eroding this. We count on the Commission to promote the elimination of child labor, including the EU member states. In 2020, UNICEF supported 57 countries to eliminate child labor. We will continue to join forces with our partners, including the EU, ILO, and our colleagues, to take forward this crucial agenda. And we need to act now. We know that we need to eliminate child labor and give back a childhood to all children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Charlotte Petri-Gonitska and also Monsieur Musa Umaru. Thank you very much for explaining to us the global estimates in terms of what it means for human beings, what it means for children. And you made some very, very important points, 7 recommendations. And also, and I think this is clearly very important, the need for collaboration, the EU, ILO, and UNICEF are working together to meet this goal. So thank you very much indeed. A very good start with the Commissioner and yourselves to this conference. Now let's hear from Ms. Ndusi Natembe. She is Minister of Employment, Labour and Social Welfare of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Minister, the screen is yours. You will be speaking French as well. Please.
Merci beaucoup. Madame la représentante de la Commission européenne, Madame la directrice du bureau de l'OIT pour l'Union européenne et les pays de Benelux, Madame la représentante de l'UNICEF, Mesdames et Messieurs, au nom du gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo, j'ai l'honneur et le plaisir de participer à ce dialogue de haut niveau pour l'action du travail des enfants et je vous remercie pour votre invitation. La République démocratique du Congo vient de célébrer ce 12 juin dernier la Journée mondiale contre le travail des enfants pour marquer notre engagement commun à mettre fin au travail des enfants. Les informations publiées dans les rapports intitulés « Travail des enfants, estimation 2020 » préviennent que les progrès enregistrés pour y mettre fin marquent le pas pour la première fois en 20 ans, inversant ainsi la précédente tendance à la baisse qui avait vu le travail des enfants reculer de 94 millions entre 2000 et 2016. Les études et enquêtes réalisées par l'Institut national des statistiques en République démocratique du Congo, en collaboration avec l'UNICEF, l'USAID, le Fonds mondial, indiquent l'existence du phénomène travail des enfants en République démocratique du Congo, aussi bien dans l'économie urbaine que l'économie informelle. Néanmoins, nous observons une baisse remarquable sur l'incidence du travail des enfants de 5 à 17 ans, soit une diminution de 26%, représentant plus de 10 millions d'enfants sortis du marché du travail. Mesdames et messieurs, l'incidence de la pauvreté sur les familles, la persistance de l'économie informelle, les crises financières successives, les conflits armés récurrents, les catastrophes naturelles, notamment les inondations et la récente éruption volcanique, l'accès à l'éducation ainsi que la persistance de la crise sanitaire de la pandémie à COVID-19 avec ses effets socio-économiques négatifs sont des facteurs de maintien des enfants dans les marchés du travail. Dans le souci de matérialiser son engagement lié à la ratification de la Convention 181 de l'OIT, entre 2012 et 2020, les gouvernements de la République, sous l'impulsion de son Excellence, M. Antoine Félix Tshisekedi Tshilombo, chef de l'État, a élaboré et mis en œuvre son plan d'action national de lutte contre les pires formes du travail des enfants. Décliné en 5 axes statistiques regroupant les actions relatives au cadre juridique, à l'éducation, à la sensibilisation et mobilisation sociale, à la réduction de la vulnérabilité socio-économique ainsi qu'à la protection des prises et la prise en charge. Le rapport d'évaluation de certains programmes signale qu'au cours des 10 dernières années, les progrès dans la lutte contre le travail des enfants n'ont pas été observés dans les secteurs de l'économie informelle, l'agriculture et les services. L'attention du gouvernement sera donc focalisée davantage dans ces domaines pour le nouveau plan d'action de la lutte contre les pires formes de travail des enfants pour la période 2022-2030. Par ailleurs, des réalisations tangibles et encourageantes ont été enregistrées, notamment dans les secteurs de la défense, des mines, de l'éducation et de la protection sociale. Le pays est doté de documents et autres mesures pertinentes pouvant contribuer à accélérer l'élimination du travail des enfants. Il s'agit du plan d'action pour la lutte contre le recrutement et l'utilisation des enfants, de l'étude de sécurité et santé dans l'agriculture, de la stratégie nationale sectorielle de lutte contre le travail des enfants dans les mines artisanales et sur les sites miniers artisanaux, du relèvement de la capacité de contracter à 18 ans. Dans notre Code du travail, c'est précisé à l'article 6, Code de 2016, de l'application effective de la gratuité de l'enseignement fondamental en 2019 et 6, de l'extension des allocations familiales extra-légales aux enfants des salariés sur l'ensemble du pays. De même, des programmes tels que PABA, Cobalt et Coteco et nombreux projets ont été exécutés par les multiples partenaires nationaux et internationaux. Mesdames et messieurs, la République démocratique du Congo s'est assigné l'objectif ultime de devenir pays pionnier de l'Alliance 8-7 afin d'accélérer le processus d'élimination du travail des enfants. À travers la promesse d'action en RDC, notre gouvernement est déterminé à éradiquer l'exploitation et les pires formes de travail des enfants. C'est ainsi que nous en appelons à une mobilisation des efforts de tous les acteurs pour un travail en synergie afin de maximiser les chances pour l'atteinte des résultats escomptés, mais aussi et surtout mettre fin à la pauvreté et aux inégalités. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today and for giving us such an accurate and vivid description of what's happening in your country and your commitment to making the children's lives better in the future. Thank you so much, Minister. Pleasure to hear you. Let's turn now to the Spanish Foreign Minister, Ms. Arantxa González, who couldn't join us in person online, but has sent us a short video message. So let's listen to what she has to say.
Je n'entends plus ce qu'elle dit.
I'm afraid we're not really able to hear what Ms. González is saying at the moment.
In 2019, 152 million children were victims of child labor in the world. Furthermore, as in other sectors, the COVID pandemic is undermining any progress made in the last few years. The closure of schools and the loss of jobs in many regions are pushing thousands of children back to the workplace. This is simply unacceptable. Spain is firmly committed with the United Nations initiative to eradicate child labor by 2025. In order to achieve this goal, we are working both globally and nationally. We cooperate actively with international organizations competent in the field of labor and the protection of children, notably ILO and UNICEF. I would like to mention in particular ILO's flagship program, Regional Initiative Latin America and the Caribbean Free of Child Labor, which the Spanish cooperation has been supporting since 2008 with over 8 million euros. This initiative works, among other things, on actions to promote national policies, legislation, and tripartite agreements to keep children out of the workplace. We are presently exploring ways to extend these efforts to other regions of the world, particularly in Africa. My country is also working actively on the fight against human trafficking in general, and especially of women and girls. This crime is often connected with child exploitation. We are cooperating with other partners to develop international instruments against human trafficking. At the national level, Spain has just adopted a new law for the integral protection of children against violence. This law will help us combat and prevent the exploitation of children in all its manifestations. Finally, employers have a key role to play. We support the United Nations Global Compact on corporate social responsibility. We are pleased that the Spanish network is the one with the highest number of members globally. This shows the commitment also of our companies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. There, ladies and gentlemen, was Arantxa González, the Foreign Minister of Spain, pointing out also to Spain's initiatives, both at home and globally. And the fight, I think this is very important that you mentioned about human trafficking and the exploitation of children. Of course, the figures that she mentioned for the number of children in labor, working children, was before the global estimates were published last week. So thank you very much to all who have intervened so far, given us a very accurate description of what someone has said, very rightly, unacceptably high figures of child labor, children in labor, and the pandemic obviously creating more dangers and risks for these children. It's now time to talk to one of these child laborers, former child laborers, if I could put it so. This is going to introduce you now during this intermezzo to a testimony by Kinsu Kumar. He's a youth advocate, formerly, as I said, in child labor from India. Mr. Kumar, Kinsu, thank you so much for joining us online. Your journey from a child laborer to an aspiring mechanical engineer has been and is an inspiration to so many people across the world. You started working at the tender age of 6 as a car cleaner and domestic help to contribute to the family income, points that have been made by all the speakers before of how this happens worldwide. Today, you are a promising student, as I said, of mechanical engineering, of Lakshmi Devi Institute of Engineering and Technology in Alwar. And you have participated, of course, as you're doing now, in many international conferences on eliminating child labor. So, Mr. Kumar, let's have your testimony. And after that, we had a video message from another child laborer, former child laborer, Hanif, who was engaged in child labor in Bangladesh. So first, Kinsu Kumar, if we could hear from you.
Namaste. My name is Kinsu Kumar, and I'm 25 years old, and I'm speaking from India. Today, when I'm speaking here, it is not just for India, but for 160 million children of the world who are still not able to speak for themselves. At the age of 7, I was working as a car cleaner. My father is a driver. My family economic condition was not good, and that's why I never went to school when I was at home. As soon as I turned 6-year-old, I started going out with my father to work with him and cleaning cars and do other odd jobs to support my family. I did not have a choice. Whenever I would look at other children who are going to school, I would always think of myself, is it fair for me to not to have a choice? Anyhow, I continued to work until I was brought to Bal Ashram by one of the activists of the Satyarthi movement. In the year 2003, I was brought to Bal Ashram, a long-term rehabilitation center for the children, which is founded by Nobel laureate Sri Kailash Satyarthi ji and his wife Srimati Sumita Kailash. As a 7-year-old child, it was hard to understand the change in the life of my life that took place that time. But today, when I'm educated, I understand it clearly. When I came to Bal Ashram, my new life of love, laughter, and freedom began. During my 10-year stay at Bal Ashram as a child, I tried to make a direct impact on the children I met. I told them my story and tried to inspire them to dream in their life. I helped them to believe how education can bring change in their life, like my life was changed. I also encouraged them to have hope and confidence. The Bal Ashram not only gave me an opportunity to live my childhood with freedom, but also to raise and speak for the other children of the world. As a youth advocate, I have represented the voice of child laborers at the significant platforms, such as in the past, I had opportunity to speak in European Union, in the Brussels, and the second Global Child Labor Conference held in Netherlands in 2010. And then Laureates and Leaders Summit in India, and 100 million for 100 million campaign, and it's 7. Today, when I'm speaking here in front all of you, it's only because my childhood was given back to me by two people. I fondly call them Bhai Sahib ji and Mata, whom the whole world known as Sri Kailash Satyarthi ji and Sumita Kailash. It was because of them that I could rewrite my destiny. Education is the key to freedom for every child, as it was for me. If I was not educated, I would have not been speaking in front of all of you today. 2021, this year, has been declared by the United Nations as the year for elimination of child labor and giving a hope to the normal childhood for millions of children like me. But sadly, the number of children pushed back into exploitation and poverty have increased, the first ever increase in the last 20 years. We all know the latest report launched by the ILO and which has shown that child labor has been increased. Earlier, it was 152 million children, but today it's sadly that there are 160 million children are in child labor. And on the other hand, there are 192 million people who are unemployed. This means the children are working in that place of adults because children are cheap laborers. And if the adults are given work at the place of children and children are sent to school, the child labor can be ended. Today, I would like to take the opportunity to urge all the people and dignitaries present here to take the faster action to end child labor and save childhood millions of children like me. I appeal to all the stakeholders who are present here that we need to give greater importance to children's voices. While talking about the rights of children, we need to listen them. There should be nothing about us without us. The European Union has a great power to change the lives of millions of the children, and including the ILO. The children who are producing your rice, tea, coffee, and everything, and many more things which we are using in our daily life. The 160 million children who deserve the same opportunity as I did are looking towards all the people who are sitting here and all the world global leaders. Only 4 years are left to achieve SDG 8.7 to make a world free from child labor. Your current action is not enough. As a children and youth, we are doing our bit to end child labor. And today, I demand here justice for every child to make a world possible where no child is exploited, where every child in the society get protection, education, and environment where he can dream and live his life happily. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've heard now very moving testimonies, personal stories of struggle and success from Kinsu Kumar and from Hanif. And I have to say, I'm sure everyone listening was as moved as I am. Bravo to you both for your courage and your bravery. And we've heard your call for justice for children. We're running slightly late, so I'm going to jump immediately to the panel. And as you've seen, we've talked a lot about the alarming figures, how they're unacceptable, a lot of commitments, and some innovative ideas have come forward as well. So we're going to take this question further with a panel that is composed of 4 very, very expert people who know this issue inside out. Let me present them to you before we start the discussion.
Ça, c'est connu de façon générale. C'est une étude.
Okay, I will continue. I think some people have their microphones on, so it would be nice if you turn them off. Thank you very much. So let me introduce our 4-member panel. We have with us Erika Gerritsen. Erika, welcome. Nice to see you. Acting Director, Sustainable Finance, Investment and Jobs. Economy that works for the people at the Directorate General for International Partnerships at the European Commission. Erika, welcome. Heidi Hautala needs no introduction, but I will do so anyway. Vice President of the European Parliament, member of the Committee on International Trade and the Subcommittee on Human Rights. Mr. Matthias Tons, Deputy Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. And last, but definitely not least, Mr. Owen Tudor, Deputy Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation. Now, I have 2 questions for you, and I've given you 5 minutes each to answer them. First of all, we've heard about how things are flagging, slowing down. People are facing more and more problems and challenges. So my first question to you is, what can we do seriously to speed up progress against child labor, especially in the midst of COVID-19? And secondly, we've heard, and the global estimates on child labor indicate that implementing universal social protection floors may be one of the most effective ways of challenging and reducing child labor. So my question to you is, from your different sectors, your points of view as social partners, what is the creation, what support would you give to the creation of such national security, social protection floors? So let's kick off with you, Erika, first of all. Your 5 minutes start now. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Shah, for the invitation and for this really interesting event, and indeed very moved by the 2 testimonies that we have heard. So thank you very much for sharing this. So from the European Commission's viewpoint, as you know, our commitment, and our Commissioner has just expressed again the commitment, the root causes of child labor need to be addressed, and addressing poverty and inequalities remain at the core of our own mandate and the purpose of our work in the European Commission, working with in international partnerships. And within this, obviously the education policy, as Commissioner has indicated, and her intention to increase to 10% the budget devoted to education is an important target, which we see contributing a lot in the future to this objective. And within this, actually, so we're talking about here education in general, but we need also to be a little bit more specific. And as it shows, and because we want to create competencies that are fit for the labor market, and also giving opportunities for the youth when coming actually to the formal labor market to have the proper competencies, we will also invest a lot in the future on vocational education and training, which can, as I said, offer ways out from child labor. So we are involved and very committed in the EU directive on sustainable corporate governance, and this, I think, is, I mean, from a policy viewpoint, a major step forward that will be taken, where we will ask all EU companies and partner countries companies to comply with the new mandatory requirements, which will include the respect of labor rights, including the prevention measures on child labor risks. All this is not going to happen alone, and it's not because you have an EU directive that things happen. And of course, this will require to accompany the private sector actors, in particular in those countries which are most affected by this phenomena of child labor. And we have also other activities in the pipeline that go back to research, data, again, root causes analysis, which will help us refine the policy orientations that we take. Coming to the second question on social protection, here again, we firmly believe that it is really essential to put in place social protection system in partner countries, because we see that this is an effective way of reducing poverty and will hence have a consequence on reducing child labor. We are working more specifically in many partner countries with a technical assistance facility, which will help mobilize experts for short-term assignments, for the kind of pilot projects that we need in order to support this setting up of a social protection system. During the COVID crisis, the whole discussion on social protection has been extremely vivid. And I believe that in a way, this has been the opportunity to put in front of the decision makers the importance of having systems that will create resilience in our societies. And having a social protection system is fully part and parcel of the resilience of societies. This also involves working on public finance management, because obviously social protection system is financially a very complex system to establish, and we are working on 20 countries on this through a budget support program, working on public finance management and the public financial implications of setting up social protection systems and possibly universal protection system down the line. Finally, the European Commission is currently reviewing its strategy to promote decent work around the world, and it goes without saying that child labor will be part and parcel of this revision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Erica. So very important points made there, reiterating what the Commissioner had said also about education, challenging the root causes, and this EU directive that's been promised and that we're all looking forward to, I would say with bated breath, for I think this autumn, if I'm not mistaken, and support as you gave for national social protection measures. Thank you, Erica. We'll come back to some of these questions in the second round. Heidi Hautala, let me now turn to you. The same question, how do we speed up, and what's your idea, your support for national social protection measures? 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shara, indeed. I think it's been already said that we are dealing with a systemic issue and that we have to address it as such. And there I would say that really continuing to push for more development measures against poverty. And it's very sad to see that because of the COVID, we seem to have been taken many steps back in our fight against global poverty. So, but we should not give up. We have to work twice as hard. I'm also very pleased to hear that the EU Commission is so dedicated to education. The European Parliament has always been calling for this 10% of the budget to be dedicated to education. And I'm a great friend of Global Partnership for Education, because I think they have really helped to set up the system. It's also about system. Perhaps it's about building schools, but more than anything, it's about putting in place a proper education system which is accessible to all children and young people. On the social protection floors, yes, I think it's an idea that has been there for some 10 years at least, that there would be a much less pressure towards also for child labor if families would have a buffer, if there would be a social protection floor to take them over difficulties and illness, old age, of course, and costs relating to parenthood, all that. So I am a great believer in the social protection floors indeed. But I'm very eager to elaborate a little bit about this forthcoming legislation on mandatory human rights and environment due diligence, because it's also a systemic answer. And we could, of course, say that it's something new. Yes, it is. But just this week, the UN is celebrating 10 years of UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and the EU is very much involved in this. So it's the best thing to do that the EU is now implementing these guiding principles by complementing voluntary measures that have been there for years, which companies have followed, but not with very good results always. with mandatory approach, that we are setting rules for companies that they will have to make sure that they don't have child labor, other human rights violations, environmental destruction in their value chains. And of course, this doesn't come without resistance, because there are many companies that do not want to open their supply and value chains. But I would say that the pressure from consumers is really compelling, that there are so many people who now say that we do not want to be complicit in child labor or deforestation. These are very much linked in the cocoa sector, which is now an interesting pilot project. In the EU has set up a project dealing with the sort of a very comprehensive approach to how the EU can put its whole toolbox next to the forthcoming legislation on due diligence to use to help Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, which are the two main producing countries, to get children to school and to eradicate deforestation. So there's a lot going on, and we have to believe that Ursula von der Leyen has said the EU has zero tolerance of child labor. So this has to become a reality now.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Thank you very much also for giving us a little bit more detail about this mandatory approach that on due diligence measures, human rights, child labor, environmental degradation. We'll come back to that possibly in the second round. But indeed, as I said earlier, everybody is waiting for that. Let me turn now to Matthias Torns. Matthias, the same question for you this time about how can we speed up progress, and what about the national social protection measures?
Thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Yeah, indeed, much has been already said, and Heidi just said it is a systemic issue which needs an answer, actually, child labor. And that is why we need to address the root cause, as so many people before have spoken already about it. Access to education. Erica spoke about it, and it's so important actually to step up funding for initiatives there. We spoke about already lacking access to social protection, and absolutely, that is the reason why COVID-19 became such a humanitarian catastrophe, because people in many countries didn't have any kind of support system which was helping them. From the ILO, we are partnering with the ITUC on a project. It's called Call to Action, the garment industry, to build up national social protection systems in 8 priority countries. And indeed, we will come up to the Commission next week or the week following to ask them to support for this joint project. The idea is that we really have national constituents on the ground driving the process, because social protection needs to be national driven. We can't have a top-down approach where we from Brussels or Geneva fly in and establishing it. It needs to be from the bottom up, and that is what we're doing together, ITUC and IOE, on the ground in 8 countries. But social protection is closely linked to another root cause, informality, right? As long as you have 60, 70, 80% of people working in informality, you will be never able to establish systems which can be financed. It's about domestic resource mobilization. And it is also about identifying the people who are in need. Team Europe has very generous spent a lot of money to support people outside of Europe, to have income support, workers who are affected and impacted by COVID-19. But what we can see is that in many countries, actually, the money cannot be spent because people are not registered. They are in informal economy. They went back to their villages. No one knows where they are. They don't have a birth certificate. And Charlotte Kornitska spoke about it, right? The fact that people don't have a birth certificate. So in short, the money cannot spend and the money does not reach the workers who actually need the money. So there's so much more to do. Social protection and informality are two sides of one coin. I think it is important to strengthen collective action. The Alliance 8.7 is an important initiative in this regard. Not only brings different actors, UN organizations, trade union, employers, companies together, but also it links the international level with the local level. And that is where actually the innovation comes from. And I really would like to thank the ILO, Thomas Wissing, for the great work they're doing in promoting this work. The Child Labor Platform of the ILO is another initiative which promotes collective action, and all companies here on the call today, I would encourage you to have a look at it because they don't want to join. Last point, and then I know my 5 minutes are over. We need to keep this a burning issue. My fear is at the moment, every day we have 5 panel discussion on child labor because it was the International Day of Child Labor, because the new estimates are about it. In 3, 4, 5 months, it goes down. At the end of the year, we have another highlight because the end for the elimination of child labor ends. But my point is we need to make sure this becomes a burning issue for next year and the next year and next year until 2025 to do that. And from the IE side, we have established a leadership initiative where we want to make sure this is the top priority for the leaders of business, for Employers Federation of companies. Too often we see, it's a junior advisor who does it, some part-time work on that, right? It's a topic of many, but we want to make it the central topic for business to engage in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So really focusing on the need for a bottoms-up approach and obviously pointing to the fact that within formality in the informal sector, social protection schemes have a challenge, let's put it this way. The need also to keep the issue, and I think this is really important, and you pointed to short attention spans that we tend to have in today's world, especially, and to keep this issue of child labor and the target of 2025 on the front burner and this leadership initiative that you've mentioned. So thank you very much indeed for those points. Let me turn to you, Mr. Owen Tudor now. And of course, the same question for you and the same amount of time as well. So the screen is yours.
So can I reiterate what other people have said about how honored I am to be here today? It's a fabulous panel, it's a fabulous initiative, and I welcome many of the things that people have already said. This is clearly an important week in a vital year. Child labour remains a scourge on humanity, and it's clearly getting worse, not better, partly as a result of the pandemic, but also because of the shrinking space available for trade unions and civil society organisations that are combating child labour generally. This is the year to demonstrate collective responsibility to ensure that children have a childhood with quality education and a realistic sense of optimism about their futures. I welcome what people have said about mandated due diligence and disclosure to allow us to hold companies to account throughout their supply chains, particularly in agriculture, manufacture and mining. And as one of the contributors has already said in the Q&A, it must involve naming and shaming. We've got to be transparent about this process. Fundamentally, the world needs a new social contract where parents can count on and children look forward to a quality job with a decent wage, where their rights are respected, whatever their employment status, and with social protection providing resilience against unemployment, illness, old age, and raising families. That new social contract is on the agenda at the ILO conference that's underway at the moment. And it's worth mentioning in that context the ILO Conventions 182 on the worst forms of child labour and 138 on the minimum working age. Convention 182 is the only universally ratified ILO convention, but as an object lesson that ratification is only a step along the way, the ILO Committee on the Application of Standards yesterday considered the case of Kiribati, where ratification has unfortunately not meant implementation. Unions will continue to raise such cases as one way to bring child labour to an end, and we will also be campaigning for the 14 countries that have yet to ratify Convention 138 do so. We will be campaigning directly on those countries and through multilateral institutions like the Commonwealth, where we are also part of the Commonwealth 8.7 network of survivor organisations. But we already know the impact that social protection can have on this issue. President Lula of Brazil, himself a former trade union leader, showed that with the Bolsa Familia when he was in office. And so we will be escalating the demand for universal social protection, starting with the project that Matthias mentioned, but also calling for a global social protection fund to enable families in the poorest countries to avoid the heartbreaking choice between giving their children a decent education or seeing them forced into child labour, something that is clearly even more of an issue since the pandemic broke out. A global fund would be a game changer. It's been called for not just by the ITUC and the European Trade Union Confederation, but by the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who is just finalising a report on that issue as an urgent humanitarian necessity. What can the European Union do? Well, supporting the idea of the global fund and then investing in it. I note what the Commissioner said earlier, but cuts in the European Union's neighbourhood development and international cooperation instrument, the budget for those things, don't bluntly help. We also need the EU to bring in those due diligence measures that Heidi and others have spoken about, and to ensure that the Porto Declaration on the EU Pillar of Social Rights is implemented as part of the wider campaign for a new social contract worldwide.
Thank you very much, Owen Tudor. So making a very strong point for a global social protection fund, and I think this is something that will obviously be on the agendas of many people. Thank you very much to all of you for sticking to your timelines, which is fantastic and very disciplined of you. So thank you for that. Erica, let me come back to you on some of the questions and issues of 8.7 Pathfinder Alliance that have been raised, and the Commissioner Urpilainen also referred to that. And I was wondering, of course, this alliance is trying out new approaches and collaboration with others in achieving target 8.7 of the SDGs. How can the European Commission actually support these countries?
Thank you for the question. Well, indeed, I think it's important to come to specific experiences, and the experience that we are running currently with the initiative on the cocoa sector, I believe is a very interesting one, because it is an integrated approach, and the issue here of child labor cannot be seen as a specific with a specific dimension, but really needs to be looked in a coherent and a comprehensive approach. And this is really the approach that we have now taken with this initiative in the cocoa sector, again in Côte d'Ivoire and in Ghana. But more targeted actions can still be envisaged. For example, we need to help countries reinforce their own legal and policy framework, and that's something we should do at national level, but also with the local authorities and all the responsible services of the state that are in charge of the issue. We also want to support and should promote the systems that are responsible for inspection and monitoring, and indeed this is important, especially because as we said before, the informal economy plays such a major role in this in child labor phenomena that this inspection and monitoring is important, and I am also personally firmly convinced that working on the informality and indeed in relation to the establishment of social protection systems is really the way forward. Then we also intend to analyze this multi-dimensions of poverty and inequality drivers, which are specifically affecting child labor, so as to be able to be more specific in our approach and performance-based approaches to hit the target right. And then the last point that I would like to make, which I think is really crucial, is the work with the private sector. We cannot expect any of this agenda to move forward if the private sector is not fully engaged. Again, the due diligence legislation will open a very important avenue for that, but it needs to be done also in a dialogue format, together with private sector, trade unions, and the national authorities or local authorities, and to have this participatory approach together with the civil society active in this area will help having a proper understanding of the issues and sort of find out solutions together in this multi-stakeholder format. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica, for pointing that out. And it just brings me nicely to Heidi, actually, because Erica made the point about dialogue with the private sector and actually working with them. And of course, this due diligence and the directive that you're planning requires a lot of collaboration and working and cooperation with each other. So how do you see that actually being, how do you actually motivate people on the child labor question specifically? Let's hear your thoughts. You have to unmute yourself, Heidi, please.
Yes, thank you, Shara. I would say that the child labor is really, it's a real red line for companies, because if they are caught with using a child labor indirectly or directly, it's very bad for their business. People are so concerned about being complicit in such horrible things. And the European Parliament has now given 3 reports, own initiative reports, during the last half a year or so, where we design more or less what we would like to see in legislation. And it's really important that the due diligence means that the companies must put in place a process whereby they map their value chain. They go all the way down to the very lowest tier, and we really expect that the Commission understands and sees that many of the most grave violations happen in the very sort of lowest tiers of the value chain, which means that we cannot limit them to just 1 or 2 layers closest to the European companies. So, and another thing is that this question of access to justice is really important. And we already see through verdicts by certain national courts that there's also a bit of a new legal reality. Do you know, in just a few weeks' time, the US Supreme Court will rule whether chocolate companies, Nestle and Cargill, which they can be made accountable for forced child labor of Malian children. And so that will be a groundbreaking thing. So I would say that we are seeing a kind of an emergence of almost like customary law that gives basically condemns and rules on such serious violations of human rights. But of course, we need to see legislation and not just court rulings. And that, I think, should guide us into this sort of new reality where I fully agree with everyone that we need to have the private sector fully informed and involved in this. But there is a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of interaction. When these 3 reports were developed by the European Parliament, there's been, I would say, hundreds and hundreds of discussions between different stakeholders and also more progressive companies. And guess what? The chocolate companies have been in the forefront. They are now in front of the courts being made accountable for child labor, but they are really the first to call for mandatory legislation. You can discuss, of course, why and how, but I feel that they have a very genuine wish to make sure that they have a level playing field, that all companies have the same rules and that they have to do the same practices to eradicate such things as child labor and deforestation. So I think it's very promising. And now we just hope that in the Parliament, we definitely hope that this time delay that the Commission is taking to develop their proposals will not mean that, let's say, the more regressive businesses interfere in the process and take us back to an old reality where companies can do almost whatever they want. This reality should not come back.
Thank you very much indeed, Heidi, for that, and also that word of caution that you put there. Thank you very much. I was wondering if I could turn to you, Matthias. You can comment on what Heidi and Erica have said, but I also have a question on education for you, because, you know, during this pandemic, of course, schools have been closed, and that is, of course, an added incentive for parents, poor parents, to send their children to work rather than to school. So how can we support the elimination of child labor through better access for children to schools?
Thank you so much for the question, and actually it links to also what Heidi and Erica have said, and directly also to underline, of course, due diligence is extremely important. It's part of the UN guiding principles. No one can step away from that. But of course, the fact also is that the majority of child labor is a purely domestic context. According to the ILO, more than 90%, for instance, in North Africa is purely domestic. There's no link to global supply chain. And what we just heard from the 2 witnesses are typical sectors which are not linked to global supply chain, right? Cleaning cars, helping with local shops with the chicken, you know, typical tasks for child labor, no link to global supply chain. And we really need to focus to all children. And that was said, you know, we don't want only a few children, all children have a right to go to school and to have a childhood. And that is the reason why this access to education is so important. And this was probably before COVID, right? Already before COVID in 2018, 258 million children didn't go to school. 258 million children didn't go to school. And these are the children then, of course, which always end at the margin of the labor market, which never have a chance actually to go into jobs which then can feed them and their families in future. And Erica made a very important point. It is not only about having education, but it's having education which leads to a job, which helps to the transition from education into employment. And these becomes more and more difficult because of the digital divide, because many regions in the world don't have access actually to what is needed to have the education in order to get into the good jobs into the future. So it is really these comprehensive measures which we need there. And for me as an employers federation, there's now someone starting the screen. I will end up it and you can share the screen for me from the employers federation. You know, governments will never be able to have a curricula in place which is up to date, because it's so quickly moving which skills are required at the labor market. And that is the reason why we need employers federation, trade unions in the governance of educational training system, because only then governments can be sure that the training systems are really producing what is needed at the labor market. So it's also a governance issue. And there we don't see any progress, unfortunately. We regularly surveying our members across the world, and neither employers federation nor trade unions are properly involved in too many countries around the world. And that's the reason why even if they go there in training system, this does not lead to the outcome which is so helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, also for pointing to the digital divide and the challenge of good governance in this sector. Very important points to have made. Owen, the same question to you if you want to respond to what you've heard from the three other panelists and also about access to education.
So, well, let me concentrate on the access to education issue. In terms of schools, obviously a key issue, as has been said earlier, is access to free quality public education. That's been made clear, and we'd certainly say that's an absolute critical element of this issue. As Matthias said, before the pandemic, just as much as it is now, but I think the pandemic has demonstrated how important that is for education, and the provision, as Matthias also said, of decent information technology, which is obviously an issue around economic development generally, and decent wages or social protection for parents so they can support their children and get them the access to education that they need. And we've seen during the pandemic, even in European countries, some of that has been a struggle in terms of child poverty in Europe. But in countries where some of that is actually way beyond what they're currently able to provide, a key role has been played by teacher unions, and teacher unions are very often in places where other unions aren't. What they've told us is that it's really important to get those teachers and schools and parents working together, and that's the key message that I wanted to convey about this. But because I haven't got much time, I'm actually going to just read out to you the words of Pilirani Kamaliza, a project coordinator in the Teachers Union of Malawi, who told Education International, our global teachers organization, that, and I'm quoting now, before the closures, out of the 10 schools involved in our project, the number of students enrolled in these schools was 7,800. But when they reopened in October, there were no more than 4,000 students present. So they organized a back to school campaign. Messages in favor of education were broadcast on loudspeakers placed on vehicles that traveled around the area. Large panels raising awareness against child labor were displayed in strategic places. Teachers and village heads went to parents' homes to make the case. And these and other joint actions led by December to over 8,000 children being enrolled, more than before the pandemic. So these things can be done if people will work together on these issues and have the state also involved in ensuring that child labor is eradicated. Similar stories, and these are ongoing processes, as Matthias said, this happened before the pandemic, it must happen after the pandemic. They can be told about Albania on the EU border, in Nicaragua, and in Asia. So the key message that I want to make is that if you want to get children into schools, then involving the teachers and their unions is absolutely crucial to that process.
Thank you so much, Owen, for making that point. As you said, teacher unions, schools and parents working together, and these back to school campaigns, which I'm sure can be and are being replicated around the world. Now, I'm a very curious person, as you may have realized, and I do want to set you a challenge. And this is going to be a challenge because of the timing, not because of the question. So I'm going to start with Erica, and 30 seconds to all of you, really. The one, I mean, we've talked a lot about different recommendations, innovative ideas, commitments, engagements, but from your point of view personally, what is the one policy measure that we could take that would be the most effective to end child labor by 2025? Erica, let's start with you, 30 seconds.
Thank you for starting with me. What I would think is this integrated approach and really understanding, because no one actually really wants to have children in the labor market. So if we look at the entire environment of trade, competition, labor markets, and labor laws together with the specific sectors, then we can have this integrated understanding of why there are still so many kids out of school.
Thank you. Heidi.
I was going to say integrated approach, but I say partnership. Okay. Because I believe that, I mean, it's not in vain that now the EU Development Commissioner is called Commissioner for International Partnerships, which this means that we can put all the tools into use, you know, for one common goal in this question of eradicating child labor as soon as possible. So this is really partnership.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Matthias, very short, please.
Very good. Address informality and make sure the company can employ people, can set up and grow in the formal economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Owen?
I'd say that the due diligence is the key issue. I think so many people have talked about it already. That's the thing that will actually make the difference. And to answer Matthias's question about that in terms of domestic and international trade and things like that, it's critically important that we set the tone, that we make clear that this form is unacceptable, and then that will drive through domestic labour markets to make sure that it doesn't happen there either.
Thank you. Thank you to all four panelists for some very frank and thought-provoking interventions, really getting us to think about how we can tackle this urgent problem in pragmatic ways, but also through policy and innovation. So I have to say the whole conference for me has been really a revelation in the commitment, the challenges, but also the way we're struggling, working, the resilience, and also the moving testimonies of the children. So thank you very much indeed for all of you for joining us. And that brings me to this part of the conversation ending. Of course, the conversation continues in all different fora across the world, here in the EU, but elsewhere as well. So I was just going to say that now we've got all the pieces together, the holistic approach, systemic, and all four of you have talked about integration and partnership and the informal sector and due diligence. So now we're going to watch a video of the winners of the Music Against Child Labour competition. This is an initiative supported by the Clear Cotton Project, which is co-funded by the European Commission and implemented by the ILO in collaboration with FAO. So if I'm not mistaken, we have the video ready to go, and I really urge you to watch it because I think we're going to learn a lot about partnership and collaboration. But for me, Shada Islam here in Brussels, thank you very much. Stay safe, and let's keep up the struggle and the combat to end child labor by 2025. Goodbye, stay safe. Let's watch the video.
Bonjour, je suis Bernice Pitroipart, je viens du Burkina Faso. Je suis ravie de participer à ce projet contre le travail des enfants. Je remercie JM International, l'Organisation internationale du travail, les musiciens et le projet Clear Coton. Merci. Donnez-moi ma place. Je ne veux pas grandir avant l'âge. Donnez-moi ma place. Je ne veux pas grandir avant l'âge. Tous les jours je suis au champ, sous le soleil, comme les autres de 8 ans, mais je vis pas pareil. Le coton m'éblouit, la verdure est pleine de soucis. Je suis un enfant, j'ai plein de rêves. Je veux être comme le président, l'école fera de moi le prochain. Je veux tout apprendre du monde et venir en aide à mes prochains. Papa, donne-moi la chance, je serai ta meilleure semence. Maman, tu pries pour moi, que s'éloigne de moi la malchance. Pakosiye, ayo, baba pakosiye. Pakosiye, ayo, ma pakosiye. Mamie fo biga fo ya mambaba fo somanjes mamiele. Ma place est à l'école et pas dans les champs, non, 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 non. Ma place est à l'école et pas dans les champs, non, non.